You know what? We had an interesting conversation in class this week. We're talking about the 1950s and how successful and affluent the Americans grew in the 1950s. How production was thriving. The Great Depression was a thing of memory. There was a collection of groups and there was a collection of locations that people struggled. This brought up the question, what makes people poor? What makes people struggle? So let's talk about that today. But first,
like, share, and subscribe. Please leave your comments and question and we may tailor the next video to you. Thanks for tuning in. As always, share, share, share. Social media is a great place to share this. Hit that like button, and if you haven't already, subscribe.
Okay, we're back. What makes people poor? Sounds like an easy question, but it's not that simple. So let's get all the ridiculous and easy but true things out of the way. Things that are easy but true. People who are surprisingly, astonishingly, unbelievably lazy. Okay, we get it. People who will not have put forth any effort in bettering themselves. People who will not work are very susceptible to being poor. But that's not the masses of poor people. We also know that people who suffer from addiction have a high chance of being poor because of their choices. Substance abuse can create poverty. In the 1950s, you have a couple populations that struggle. You have the Native Americans trying to get off the reservation, some being enticed off the reservation. You have immigrants. Many in the Southwest are being enticed over to be cheap labor for the farms that are just beginning to mechanize. So migrant farmers are a thing that is very real, and it's almost like the backbone of some of these agricultural societies. They're working incredibly long hours for incredibly little pay. They're not able to unionize. What rights do they have? A lot of them aren't even citizens. They're illegals, as we would call them today. They're undocumented. They don't got paperwork. Undocumented. Third group that's struggling has been here since the very beginning, African Americans. African Americans are struggling. The Great Migration sees an incredible number of African Americans move from the South, especially in areas that the racism is violent and very aggressive. Moving from those areas to the North. They might have family that's successful in the North, but the tricky thing is African Americans for generations have gained agricultural skills, rural skills. Now they're moving to big cities like New York, moving to Philadelphia, Chicago, all these northern cities. And the problem is they don't have urban skills. Can they use the typewriter? Literacy skills, communication skills, experiences doing certain things. Some of them lack these things. What do we see moving forward? We see all of these groups push for the thing that actually limits their opportunity to crawl out of poverty. African Americans, after the 50s, in the late 50s and 60s, what's one of the first things they push for? Desegregation of schools. Our kids got to go to better schools. They need these urban, modern skills so we are not just menial labor, simple task, washing dishes and cleaning floors. Grandma had agricultural skills, but my son's going to use a typewriter. My son's going to drive. My son's going to be highly literate. My son's going to go to college. These are the aspirations for African Americans in the 50s, and this is the civil rights battle that they have to desegregate schools. Brown versus the Board of Education, Little Rock, Ruthie Bridges. All these stories are going to happen in the next generation because one thing that kept them poor was a lack of urban skills and a lack of access to acquire those skills through education. Back on the Mexican Americans, they're migrant farmers, they're laborers, and one thing you're going to see in the next generation is Cesar Chavez and other people push for citizenship and residency rights, almost union type rights, fair labor practices. that not just Hispanic Americans, not just Mexican Americans benefit from, but we eventually all benefit from, that are in the field of labor, that are in the industries that are labor oriented. Now, all of these three ethnic groups also faced another thing. Yes, not having access to certain skills decreased the amount of jobs they were offered or able to do. But also, the discriminatory practices that were still okay in our society in those eras was another thing that creates poverty. Now let's jump off of the ethnic issue and let's take a look at location. Some people don't connect their skill set with their location. Let's give a historical example. Up and down Appalachia, we in Pennsylvania have this Appalachian mountain trail that goes through us. But I told my students, as you move farther down south, these towns were one-trick ponies, so to speak. These were one cash crop style economies. What does that mean? What I mean by that is when the mine dried up, that town or city was in trouble. When mechanization came in and the process that took 10 people to complete now only took 3 people to complete, 7 people were out of a job. Thousands of people in Appalachia lost their jobs. And not only did they lose their jobs, but it changed their society. Some people were able to move out. Some people were able to retain mining jobs in other towns, etc. Other people did not have the skill set or the means to move out of those areas. They move to a big city, they don't have big city skills, they suffer with a higher cost of living. So they stay with this low cost of living, but there's not a lot of jobs and not a lot of opportunity. The problem is, after generations, you have less doctors and dentists and people like that in these areas because a lot of people don't have insurance, can't pay for them. You have areas that have concentrated poverty, generational poverty, and they are stuck in a rural area, hard to get to because of highways. They're not going to attract factories. They're not going to attract certain things to rejuvenate their economy. People's health suffers because there's very few doctors in this area. People's education is menial at best as they try to recruit and use Teach for America and all these different organizations to bring quality teachers to educate their kids to do better, leave the area, bring opportunity back to the area, whatever. Appalachia suffers because of an economy that was based off of one thing, and when mechanization or just that resource, becoming scarce, the area suffers heavily. Also, we have the inner cities that will suffer. In the 1950s and various times in American history where you have a large exodus of middle-class people who will work in this city but live outside the city. If that's a different municipality, and not just the good neighborhood, quote unquote, then they take the tax money. So in the 1950s, some people were suffering because they lived in the inner city that had middle class people abandoned, move out to the suburbs. If middle class people move out to a suburb that's a different municipality, they're paying different taxes. So therefore, they're creating money in the city and they're taking the taxes to a different place. Who's going to pay for the police officers and pave the sidewalks and repair the roads and keep the street lights on and pay for the teachers, etc.? This creates a problem that the less educated become the leaders and there's less resources to work with. That's why some places have a little tax that if you work in our city but live someplace else, you pay a little tax out of your income for living there. So some of that money that is being created stays in the city. What do you think about these things? What else creates poverty in modern day America or even historically? Are we looking to fix the poverty creating issues in our society? Yes, we know that some people are poor because of their own vice, because of their own weakness, but that's not something that we can fix through policy. What we can fix are the people who are in adverse situations. Their skill doesn't match up with their location. Their city does not have the resources that it once had, or does not have the leadership it once had. So before we go, let's recap. What makes people poor? Yes, there's the personal vice thing. We know that, but it's kind of hard to fix. That's something that their family, their faith, their mentors have to fix. But getting rid of personal vice, laziness, addiction, etc., we have exploitation, as we looked at, people exploiting illegal immigrants, people exploiting those who have no better opportunity. Then we looked at, with the African Americans, the skill set sometimes doesn't match the place where they're living. Does that happen in modern day? Do people have a knack for fashion design, but they live in a small town and they have trouble promoting their craft? Or do they have a skill that's not necessarily needed? Like African Americans that had a lot of agricultural skills, when they moved to the city, they had trouble because their skills didn't match their location. Then you had places that were, as I say, they were one-trick pony. They're like a cash crop economy, where one thing is the backbone of their economy, and when that fails because of mechanization or because the resource is no longer there, like in Appalachia, those people suffer. And last but not least, sometimes you have these concentrated poverties, like in the 50s and even sometimes in modern time, where portions of a city or a city itself becomes concentrated poverty. The wealthy or middle class that can support that area with taxes move out to the suburbs, move to a different municipality, and therefore the resources are getting taken away from that area. People drive into work, but then drive home. Are there any other things that I forgot that create poverty? Always like, share, subscribe. Leave your comments and questions. We'll talk to you soon. Be good to yourself.